Hi, everyone. This is Eva Lewandowski, and today is Webinar Wednesday. And today's topic is how to create a great presentation or elevator pitch. And for those of you that may not know me, again, I'm Eva Lewandowski, and this is a little bit of my background. I'm a certified life coach, certified EFT practitioner. I'm also a speaker. I co-host a radio show with my husband, Corporate Talk with Charlie and Eva. And the biggest thing was I was an IT consultant for over 30 years for a number of Fortune-ranked organizations across the country. And I'm also a member of the Screen Actors Guild. So I have voiced some commercials, and I took a lot of acting and improv training back in my late 30s. And the reason for all of that, which I will get into in a minute, is because during a lot of this time in the bulk of my adult life, I had really debilitating stage fright, even though a lot of people really didn't know. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I wanted to go through today's agenda. So we're going to talk about my story and then why you should even bother listening to this presentation. It's one of the criteria that I like to use when I create a presentation. And also, then I will go into my 5 steps for creating a great talk. And then, of course, I always have to talk about nerves because nerves is my thing and my sweet spot. So we'll talk about that a little bit because so many times what holds us back is the fear and the nerves, and that's a lot of the reason that why we don't get up and present. And then at the end, I'm going to have a Q&A. So if during the presentation you have any questions at all, you can ask them during the presentation. Just hover your mouse over the top of the screen. There's a Q&A button. You can hit that. There is also a chat button, and you can hit that as well. And you can just ask some questions, and we can either address them right away or at the end of the presentation. So I wanted just to give you a little bit about my background and my mission now. So this is me with my parents. I'm an only child. My parents were from Poland. And just to give you a little background on the stage fright piece of it, when I was in high school, I got up to do a presentation, and out of the blue, my voice started to shake. And I have no idea where that came from. I had not had it before, but it really scared me and it really unnerved me. And as I got older, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse until it got to the point that I could be in a meeting, and if someone said, why don't we go around the room and everyone just tell us what your name and what you do, it could almost put me into a panic. And in grad school, I would find myself having to do presentations, and I would start shaking. And I could literally be shaking from head to toe. It was absolutely awful, and it was absolutely debilitating. And that's not to say that I didn't have a very successful career as an IT consultant, because I did. I led implementations around the country. But during all that time, even though my stage fright got better, it was still pretty bad. And I always said to myself that if I could somehow figure out a way to get past this stage fright, that I would help other people, because I know there is so many of us that are sitting in the back of the room that aren't sharing our opinions, that aren't voicing what we know and sharing our gifts. And so my mission is to help those of us that have a hard time to get up to the front of the room. And a lot of times people will say, well, you know, I really don't have a problem with stage fright. But if I ask them to come on the radio show, they'll say, well, I don't know what to say. Well, that maybe isn't classic stage fright, but it's definitely fear talking. So you may not have a big problem getting up and doing a presentation, but maybe video unnerves you, or maybe large groups unnerve you. Now, I've had other people tell me that when I was doing some coaching in Dallas at the eWomen conference, I coached a lot of people, and I had some people say, you know, big groups don't really bother me. It's the small, intimate ones that do. So what I share in all these different webinars and in my work and in my blogs is fear stops us at a lot of different points. And so you may not have classic stage fright, but I still think that you can find something that you can take away from these presentations. You know, because presentations come in so many different forms. So there's classic presentations, but there's also introductions. There's the elevator pitch, you know, when somebody asks you, what do you do? Maybe you're at a networking event, or maybe you're just, you know, at grandma's for the weekend. You know, what are you doing? You kind of have an elevator pitch telling people what you do. There's also now workshops, teleseminars, conference calls. So many of us are working from home. We're on the phone a lot. It's important that we know how to present ourselves on these calls. We're also live streaming, Facebook Live, promotional videos. This is just, some of the different ways that we present. So why bother? Why bother even worrying about Facebook Live? A lot of people will say, well, I don't ever have to do videos. I don't have to do presentations. I don't have to do any of this stuff. Well, as I just said, there's so many different places where we present. And if you go and do a video or you do a presentation, visibility is key. People see you right away. They get to know your personality really quickly. And it's much easier to explain something visually. So a lot of times people like to write, which is fine. But what we're finding is that so many times people aren't going to take the time to actually read what you've written. An audio of what you want to get across or a video of what you want to get across can be so much more effective. Also, if you're doing presentations, credibility is huge. I mean, at the moment, like when I'm behind the mic or if I'm in front of a group presenting, at that moment, I'm automatically the expert. And that's anybody that picks up the mic. The second you pick up the mic, you're the expert. Your credibility shoots through the roof. Also, if you're doing video or audio, it's really easy to distribute and replicate. So once you get that video or audio in your hand, you can then use that in a number of different places. So if you're working with clients, maybe you do an introduction video or audio, you can send it to them automatically. You don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And of course, video is just everywhere. You see it everywhere. So these are the EVA 5 steps for how to create a great presentation. And these are the ones that I came up with because I think these are the ones that resonate. When I see really good speakers, they all have at least some of these steps. You can tell that they've taken the steps. And the first 3 steps are really about thinking about what you're going to do before you even start the presentation. So I created these steps as a way for those of us that have a hard time coming up with a video topic or a presentation topic, what to think about to go through so that you can quickly and easily pull it together. Because it is really easy once you go through these steps. So step 1, know your audience. Seems like a no-brainer. Everybody would think about that. But it was a while ago, I was up in Columbus. I gave a presentation and it was to the wedding professionals of Columbus. And afterwards, the woman that was, that had hired me to speak had said, I'm so glad that you talked about brides and weddings because I have so many speakers that come here that never talk about brides or weddings. And you think to yourself, well, how can that be? Well, it's kind of easy because you get so heads down into your topic, you forget who you're talking to. So the first step is know your audience. Who will you be speaking to? How familiar are they with your product, your service, or your topic? Because that really determines how simple or complex you make your presentation. A lot of times we are so good at what we do, we forget that not everybody is into it as much as we are, right? And a lot of times we have to take what we do and simplify it. And if you can have a 7th grader understand what it is that you're doing, then you're probably at the right level. Because most of the time, people aren't as into your topic as you are. So just think about who you're talking to and how simple or complex you should make it, your topic. And you also want to make sure that it's relatable to the audience. So, on Corporate Talk, we have a lot of different authors. Every week we have a new author or a new speaker or a new entrepreneur on our show. And a lot of times people will question why we came up with the different speakers that we did. We've had psychics on the show. And yeah, the show is called Corporate Talk, but what we'll say is, well, let's look at how we can use our intuition at work. Or if we're talking to a personal trainer, well, if you don't feel good at work, you're not going to be doing a good job. You're not going to be really tapping into your creativity. So just take whatever topic you have and make it relatable to the audience that you're speaking to. Step number 2 is my favorite one. Charlie and I use this all the time. Why bother? Why should they even listen to what I have to say. Your presentation is always about your audience, right? It's not about us, it's about who we're talking to. And so we always want to make sure that we're giving them a compelling reason to actually listen to what we have to say. You know, we want to pull them in right from the start. And you use that by telling stories, giving examples, using metaphors. All of that makes the topic much more relatable to your audience. And then again, you know, present your message really clearly. You know, what will they get if they stay to the end? You know, what's the payoff? And how does it relate to the issues they may be having? And this is something for not just a presentation, but for an elevator pitch. You know, if you're someone that goes to a lot of networking events, you might want to think about, well, how does my story relate to the people that I'm talking to? You know, how can I pull them in? It's always about the people that we're talking to. You want to think about all this before you even start preparing a presentation. And number 3 is my favorite. What's your story? You know, why do you do what you do? I had someone recently that I was coaching said she had a really hard time networking and doing her elevator pitch. So I said, okay, well, tell me what your elevator pitch is. So she told me, and it was good, it was fine. But I said, well, why do you do what you do? And she got really teary-eyed and she said, because I absolutely love it. I love helping people, you know, develop their websites. I love everything about it. So, and that's what made it so compelling. Like all of a sudden I'm like, here, take my website and fix it, because you want to work with that person because you see the passion. You can't get misty-eyed every time you're doing your elevator pitch, right? Because, you know, as I said recently, it can be kind of off-putting. But on the other hand, you want to show the people that you're talking to how passionate you are about what you're doing, how much you love it while you're doing it. You know, if you have a story where you overcame something, tell us what you overcame. Tell us how you did it. You know, tell us how we can do it in half the time. So think about all your presentations and even your elevator pitches and what your story is behind it, why you do what you do. I mean, I've heard people speak in a very compelling way about businesses that they started, not because they were maybe so enthralled with the business, but because they wanted to spend more time with their kids and the business gave them that opportunity. And even that was really compelling. It was a really compelling reason to listen. So think about what your story is and what you love to do. Okay, so now after you did the first 3 steps, it's time to structure your talk. This is where I think a lot of people get really hung up. And all you want to do is just make it very simple. You'll start out very simply, and then we'll talk about how you can then tweak it as you go along. So the first thing is an introduction. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you here? Then give us your agenda. You know, what are we going to talk about today? Then the why, kind of the why bother, why you're presenting today, what's bringing us together. Then go right into your topic. And the simpler the topic is, the more relatable, the better. Your slides should only be about 1 or 2 slides per minute, and they shouldn't be too wordy. Like this slide is probably a little bit too wordy, just as it is. You probably even want it to be even more streamlined than this, because everything else, these are just prompts for you to then fill in the rest of the topic. So you'll never do it the same way twice, but you just want these prompts to kind of just jog your memory as to what to say next. And 1 or 2 slides per minute of your presentation is perfect. And then if you're selling something, if you have something that you want to offer at the end, you want to put in a call to action. You know, what do they do now once they have their info? And that's something that you can dive into more with different sales techniques. We're not really going to talk about sales today, right? But that is something you can put in there as a call to action. And then one of my pet peeves is avoid embedding video unless you really, really know what you're doing. A lot of people like putting video in their presentations. I tend to stay clear of it, because unless you have someone that has taken that video and embedded it into your presentation in a way that you don't need the internet or anything else, then it will work. Otherwise, it could be a disaster. And I've seen that happen one too many times. So that's why I decided to kind of put that in here. And also, you know, include a question and answer, and then just your your contact information. Just very easy peasy. Just have these few things: the intro, the agenda, why you're presenting, your topic, question and answer, and contact information. The simpler, the better. And especially for a lot of us, we like to give people a lot of information. So you may start with a whole lot of information, and typically I would cut it in half. Because when you start adding in your own thoughts and people start asking questions, you'll end up going over time. So you don't really need as much information as you think you do. So just keep it as simple and clean as possible. So now we go into step 5, which is a two-parter. There's like step 5A and step 5B, practice and prepare. Practice is my big thing. I could do a whole webinar on practice, and I probably will on its own. I'm also thinking about doing a 4-week practice challenge for people, because to me, practice is absolutely key. You have to practice standing up, and you have to practice standing up and out loud. You really step into that role of presenter. This is the fastest way to determine whether or not your slides are flowing correctly. We think if we just keep going over it in our head that we can tell. It's not until you get up and you start presenting as though you're absolutely at the conference, on the phone, at the in the conference room with all the folks there. It's not until you do that that you realize, like, oh, hang on a second, this doesn't feel natural when I move to the next slide. Practice is absolutely essential. If you take anything away from this webinar today, take away that practice is key, especially for those of us that aren't used to sharing our opinions, or that have stage fright, or that have a hard time speaking up when all eyes are on us, right? If you have a hard time with that, practice is essential, because you don't want to memorize. You want to internalize all of this. You want it to flow naturally. And the only thing that will do that for you is practice. I think so many times people feel that they're not good speakers because they get up, they maybe do a presentation once or twice a year, and then they get up at some, conference that they had to go to, and it just didn't go that well. It fell flat. They weren't really engaging the audience. The audience didn't feel like there was a lot of audience participation. And they think, well, I'm just a crummy speaker. No, you're a speaker that hasn't had a lot of practice. When you see a really good speaker, it's because they practiced, and they've practiced a lot. They talk everywhere. And I mean, you know these people, right? They're talking all the time. So if you're not one that talks all the time, this is the way to practice, standing up and out loud. And I know that I'm kind of harping on it, but it's important. The other thing is, don't memorize. Work on speaking confidently, but extemporaneously, right? You don't want to memorize it. You want to know your material really well, but you don't want to memorize it. So internalize it. And I also always tell people to record themselves. Make sure that you know what you sound like. A lot of times, if you haven't recorded yourself, you might think you sound perky when the reality is that you sound flat. So you want to make sure that you record yourself so that you know what you sound like. And make sure that you time yourself. Timing yourself is really key, because so many times we think we have just the right amount of slides, that we know what's going on, that we know the time. Unless you actually have that recording and the timer in your hand, you're not going to know for sure. So make sure that you're always timing yourself and recording yourself. And finally, for the preparation, if you're going to be on site somewhere, I always say create a self-executing slideshow of your presentation. So within PowerPoint, if you're using PowerPoint, which is what most people use, there is an option in there it's a drop down, and it's called slideshow. You want to just use that slideshow so that when you give somebody your flash drive, your jump drive, they can just pull up the slideshow. They don't have to go into PowerPoint and then open the file, blah, blah, blah. Just make sure you give them the slideshow. And I always have a copy of the presentation with me. It can either be on your iPad, on your tablet. I like to have a hard copy of it so that if everything falls flat, I still have at least some notes to go from. if you're doing a large presentation where you're going to be talking for a long period of time, you can put all your notes in a binder. And then you can have your notes in there. You can be just walking around with the binder, flipping through, and then you've got your notes in there as well, especially if it's some technical material. So you want to think about doing that. So those are the 5 steps. They're fairly easy. It's really just a matter of knowing who your audience is, why they should listen, getting the material together, and then just sitting down and taking those first steps and outlining it and just putting it into a PowerPoint. And then as you start practicing, you'll know what to fill in because you'll hear the gaps. You'll hear the gaps as you're practicing it. So now I wanted to touch a little bit on nerves because nerves is my sweet spot and my mission. And I know that a lot of us, even though at different times we feel fine, I know the fear always creeps up. It always creeps up. And it can surface whenever we step into the spotlight. And for some of us, it's worse than it is for others. But for the most part, it's because we feel judged, we feel vulnerable, we feel like we may fail. And sometimes that fear gets so overwhelming that it keeps us stuck. And we procrastinate. And we say no to opportunities and then justify it by saying that we're too busy. And it's baloney. You should be saying yes to the opportunities and let someone else handle the busy work. So I want to start helping people really start handling the fear. And believe me, after a lot of trial and error and, a year at Toastmasters where I never got up, hypnosis, presentation classes, everything else, nothing was helping. I know what doesn't work. And the biggest thing that doesn't work is powering through, because that underlying fear is never addressed. You never look at it. So it will just keep you stuck. Powering through absolutely does not work. And I just realized that it will just keep with nothing else. It will keep you stuck. That's the power with powering through. So you'll hear a lot of people that don't have stage fright say, well, you have to start getting used to coming up here to the mic. So why don't you come up here to the mic and tell us what you do? For some of us, that can absolutely be traumatizing and is not the right thing to do. For other people where the fear isn't too bad, that can be viewed as a little bit of practice. But for the most part, it doesn't work for those of us that have bad fear. Also using someone else's formula. My big thing is that we always have to speak from the heart. When you start speaking from the heart, you can't use anyone else's formula. So my goal when I talk about this is to empower you to understand that it's about you and the way you want to present. So my formula, my 5 steps, are fairly wide open so that you can put yourself into it. And that's really what it's all about. When you start putting yourself into it and you're talking from your heart, you're not translating between your head and your heart. What I used to do a lot at work was I would be thinking to myself, well, I don't sound professional enough, or I don't sound smart enough, or I don't sound corporate enough. When I started letting go of all of that and just letting myself sound like me and just saying what I really meant, it was so much easier and my fear started to dissipate. So it's really important to be authentic, and you can't be authentic when you're trying to be someone else. What also doesn't work is memorizing. You're too heads down in what you're going to say, and you can no longer be authentic. It's too hard. It's too hard to memorize. If you miss a word, it's going to throw off your cadence, and suddenly you're not going to know where you're at. Don't memorize. Just work on and practice letting yourself out. And of course, we know ignoring it until the last minute or until the next time doesn't work either. And I know this seems like a no-brainer, but honestly, a lot of people do it. They get so scared. They think, well, I'm just gonna hold off and I'll worry about it later. I'm not gonna worry about it now. It doesn't work. Give yourself some time to practice. So what does work is kind of a 3-step approach that I like to take. And the first step is awareness. And this is always what I'm preaching. And I know I was saying it before, but it's embrace who you are. Don't try to change who you are. Get comfortable with your own style and start looking at your own internal thoughts. And you want to write down what the negative thoughts are and then reframe them. You want to also examine what the external influences are. So do you have people in your life that are, kind of keeping you down a little bit, that aren't really helping you, that are talking for you and not letting you talk? You want to start looking at all that. You want to become aware of that. Then once you become aware, it's time to release it. I like using emotional freedom technique. Now, we don't really have time to go through that right now, but emotional freedom technique is a great way to release the negative emotions in your body. You can also use breath work to release the negative emotions. And finally, you want to move through. So moving through, you can start by first getting grounded. And I have a little visual here where you close your eyes, you relax your entire body, one body part at a time, and visualize roots shooting from your feet and rooting into the center of the earth. That's one way to get grounded. Also speaking from your heart and speaking up as much as you can. That works. The practice works. It's always about the practice. And here I have it again, practice. Fear keeps us from speaking up. We need practice to become good speakers. Do not think it's a natural thing for good speakers. I mean, you have some people that, love to speak since the time they were little. They still need to practice too to get really good. And you can use video, audio. You want to think about expanding when you're speaking instead of contracting. Contracting makes us look nervous. When you're feeling nervous, kind of get a little bigger, make your voice a little louder, stand a little taller, feel yourself taking up some space in the room. And of course, speak up whenever you get the opportunity. And these are my final tips. Go big. That's the difference between contracting and expanding. When you watch a James Bond movie, he's not the biggest guy in the room, but you can feel his presence in the movie. You can really feel him taking up some space. And you also want to use vocal variety. Make your voice go softer, louder. You play with that a little bit when you're recording yourself. If you're going up in front of the room, think about wearing comfortable clothes. You don't want to feel constricted in what you're wearing or teeter on 4-inch heels if you're not comfortable up there. If that's your thing, that's great. But if you're not comfortable yet, make sure that you're comfortable in there and what you're wearing. My biggest rule, too, is this next one. It's invoke the 24-hour rule, which is limit or eliminate caffeine, sugar, and alcohol 24 hours before you go to speak. It will really help if you've got nerves. It will really help bring your nerves down because you've already got a lot of adrenaline working. You don't need any more. So if you can either eliminate or limit these 3 things, caffeine, sugar, and alcohol, it will really help. And I also love to say, so what? If something goes south, you have to start learning to say, so what? Stuff happens. Great speakers make mistakes. It's that they know how to recover. They've built some resiliency. So a lot of us that have a hard time speaking or presenting ourselves or being visible have a hard time saying, so what? We have this perfectionistic tendency that we kind of embrace too much. We need to start just letting go of things and not worrying so much about it. And in that same line, it's like, don't overcompensate for your mistakes. Don't overcompensate. If you make a mistake, just recover and keep going. Don't keep going back to it. And finally, expect the best, but plan for the worst. So expect that the best will happen, but also think about, if something really scares you, well, what would I say if I forgot what I'm going to say? Or how would I recover? Think about that a little bit. And then, of course, celebrate all your successes, big and small, and then go relax. So now's the time for Q&A. And if you have any questions, there's a Q&A at the top of your screen. And there's also a chat. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask me, go ahead and put it in there now. Oh, I did have one question. How many slides per minute? It's pretty easy. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just 1 to 2 slides per minute should do it. Okay. Oh, I have one more question. Do you recommend practicing even if it's not work? Even if it's in a not workplace Presentation. Yeah, I do actually. I think you should practice all the time. I think you should practice your elevator pitches. What I like to do is if I had, let's say I was in a meeting and something went south in the meeting and I think about, well, I should have really said it this way. Sometimes I'll even practice that, what I should have said instead of what I did say. So to me, practice is absolutely essential. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I certainly appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, here's my contact information. You can just reach out to me at eva@charlieandeva.com. Also, my phone number is down there. And have a great day. And hopefully we will talk to you next month on that webinar Wednesday, which is all about overcoming resistance, which I think is going to be another really good webinar. Have a great week. Thanks.